Welcome to today's video where I'm going to show you how to write the perfect training program that gets results for your clients. Already in this series, we've explored the importance of knowing your anatomy. We've dived into assessments and how having an assessment process allows you to charge more money. And we're now going to look at how that all links together to create the most effective training program for your clients. And if you stay until the end of the video, I'm going to give you a free client program that you can use as an example. But before we get there, you know the drill by now. Make sure you've hit the subscribe button, because if you implement this video series, you'll fill your diary, charge more, and get the results your clients came to you for. But for now, let's dive into today's video. And in case you didn't remember, my name is Jewade Graham, and I help personal trainers build their PT business, fill their diary, and help get them off gym shifts. This video is going to be broken down into 4 sections. Initial considerations for program design, exercise selection, training frequency, and of course, your example beginner program. Section 1, what's your client goal? Do they come to you for fat loss, to build strength, or to rehab an injury? When you understand this information, it gives you the tools to give them the minimum effective dose. And what I mean by minimum effective dose, what's the smallest amount of training that you can give them that will have them moving towards their goal without overloading them, and gives you space and time to progress a little bit later on. So a client scenario, someone comes to you for fat loss. Instead of giving them a 6-day-a-week program that we know is going to burn them out after 3 weeks and leave them feeling unsustainable and unfulfilled when they don't achieve their goal, instead, what you might do is estimate that 2 days a week of training will help them start to move along their journey towards their goal, give them that, and then allow you to increase as and when needed to progress them towards their goal. Next up, what's their starting point? What's their training history? What's their skill level? And how long do they actually have to train? So when it comes to training history and skill level, we can kind of roll that into one. Essentially, what experience does your client have of training? Because if someone's a ranked beginner, you might have a smaller exercise pool to choose from in the beginning. If someone's a little bit more experienced, they will understand the processes of training. They might be more skilled at certain more advanced movements, which opens out your exercise pool and allows you to start them at an appropriate point. And lastly, when it comes to free time to train, there's no point in you writing a 5-day bro split if your client is a stressed, busy city executive and they only have 2 days a week to train. So that's something that we always need to consider as well. And finally, for this section, are there any potential barriers? So what are your client expectations? What are their timeframes? And do they have any injuries that you might need to work around? So to give you an example of expectations, if your client comes to you to lose fat, but they want to lose 3 stone in 12 weeks, it's probably not going to happen. At least it's not going to be very enjoyable, but you might have fun trying. Essentially, we have to meet them where they're at, give them a relevant and effective starting point that manages their expectations, but also gives them enough progress so that they can start to see their outcome. That might mean that you take their 3 stone in 12-week goal and say, for the first 12 weeks, let's focus on getting the habits and routines of training with a full body plan. Once we've got the skill level there, during that time, you will lose weight, of course. Once we've got the skill level there, we can then start to progress your program, have fun with training, and then move on to the next stone. Essentially, you're taking an overall goal, you're bringing it back to training, which is what we do as personal trainers, and we're giving them checkpoints that align with enjoyment of training, which creates the habit that will be there for the long term, and also their primary goal of fat loss, which is going to be facilitated by how much output, i.e. training, they're able to do. And of course, if they have any injuries, your knowledge of anatomy, assessments, and exercise selection will help you work around this when it comes to designing an effective program. Section 2, exercise selection. Someone's goal will guide your programming. So let's say someone comes to you for fat loss or someone comes to you for muscle gain, their program on paper might be largely similar. The difference being you might change or tweak volume and frequency dependent on the goal. So if someone comes to you for fat loss, you might have them squatting. You might have them squatting twice a week because that's the minimum effective dose that will have them losing weight. Versus someone that comes into you for muscle building, the minimum effective dose to build muscle for that person might mean they need to squat 3 to 4 times a week. So the program on paper would be the same exercise, but would differ in terms of volume and frequency. Of course, there are things to consider like time to train and recovery, but overall on paper, we have one exercise. And this is where phasing could come into play as well. So when you have someone that comes into your business that wants to ultimately build muscle, they might need to go through a fat loss phase first. So that means you would have two phases. The first phase would be a fat loss phase where you program the squat twice a week. When they transition into the muscle building phase, you increase the frequency because over time they will have increased their skill level as well, and they probably will be able to recover a little bit better as well. So you go from 2 times a week squatting to 4 times a week squatting, and that is your exercise selection. You can also complement different exercises. So let's keep the squat example. You might complement that with a leg extension that works the quads. You might complement that with a leg curl that works the hamstring, which will stabilize the hip during a squat pattern movement. The opportunities and ideas are endless, but it all comes back to exercise selection, having a pool that you begin with that you can then expand with your clients. I'm going to talk a little bit more about skill level because I mentioned skill level a moment ago. And when it comes to starting points for exercise selection and training programs for your clients, your assessment process will give you a lot of information as to where to start your clients. But when I speak about the assessment process, yes, of course you do an initial assessment, but the assessment process is actually ongoing because your initial assessment is essentially a snapshot into what your client's capabilities actually are. When we do an initial assessment, your client is often coming into a new environment. They're often coming to you cold and not trained, which will affect the output they actually give you. So you might write a program based on that. And then during your first session, when someone's warmed up, when someone's a little bit more comfortable with their environment, their ability to perform the exercise completely changes. If we keep that in mind, we understand that the assessment process may actually last the first 3 or 4 sessions and not the first 1 session. Essentially, it just means that you need to keep an open mind and be adaptable when it comes to programming and exercise selection. These next 5 things help you select appropriate exercise. Training history, movement capability, structure, injury history, both physical and psychological, and of course, enjoyment. Moving on to section 3 now. And this is really where we're going to start to consider the timeframes for someone's goal. Because if someone comes to you with a 12-week photo shoot goal, their training program is going to look a lot different than someone that comes to you with a longer term plan. So if someone comes to you with a photo shoot in mind, we might need to use and utilize the training program as more of a tool to manage a caloric deficit. That might mean that someone has no choice but to train 3, 4, or 5 times a week because we need to keep expenditure high to get them into condition for the photo shoot. When we compare that to someone that has a longer term goal, maybe it's fat loss, maybe it's building strength. When it comes back to minimum effective dose, we can start them training at 2 to 3 times a week in terms of frequency, and then we can layer and build that up dependent on time they can train, dependent on skill level increases, and also dependent on enjoyment as well. But essentially, we have a little bit more wiggle room when it comes to frequency, dependent on the client's goal. So that's something that is really important and often overlooked by a lot of personal trainers, and it can go both ways. Do we need to start and then pull back once we've achieved the goal, or start the other end and increase when we're moving towards the goal? Another thing to consider is client experience. If your client is inexperienced, you'll likely have a smaller exercise pool, which means their programs will be fairly similar. So if you've got someone on a 5-day split and they can't really train, but they're going to train anyway, you will likely have to repeat the same exercise every single session for 5 days. Couple of things to consider there. How do they recover from that? What will their enjoyment be like from that? And also, how sustainable is that in the long term? So if someone's got smaller or less skill, we will likely have to reduce the frequency they train, at least until they build the skill level, just to give them room to make mistakes, improve their level of learning, and then also improve the pool of exercises that they have available to them. On the flip side, if someone comes to you and they are more skilled, you will have a larger exercise pool at your disposal, which means you can take into consideration training frequency, recovery, management of fatigue, and also exercise selection. So if someone comes to you and they know what they're doing, for lack of a better term, you might be able to give them an upper-lower split, which will allow them to train more frequently, because if they're training upper on one day, they're not going to be training lower, which means their lower body will still be recovered enough to train the next day. You might have a day in between to rest and then repeat that process, versus the beginner client that only has 4 exercises or 5 exercises available to them. You will likely need to train, train, and then rest, which is going to be largely a 3-day-a-week split. So on both ends of the spectrum, we need to be able to think about and make a decision based on someone's skill level being a beginner or their skill level being advanced, because it will mean 2 completely different things when it comes to training frequency. The intensity and type of session. So I just touched upon someone that is a little bit more skilled, being able to recover a little bit better from exercise. We need to be able to track, which is where the check-in process comes in, and we'll explore that later on down the line. But for now, we need to be able to track and understand how someone recovers from their training program, because if we get that data, we can then utilize that data to make sure that our training program is set and maintained at an appropriate level to keep progress going. So if we understand that someone can only train their lower body twice a week, we might have an upper-lower split and have upper-lower. But if we need to have them on a full body split for whatever reason, we might need to limit the amount of lower body exercises that are within that program based on what we know they can recover from. So it's just something to consider rather than throwing a kitchen sink at your clients. And something to consider, client commitment. What are they actually willing to do? So we might be able to write the perfect program that is a 5-day split. And we know that the 5-day split, this perfect program, will have them reaching their goal in 12 weeks, which is what they came to you for. But they tell you adamantly they can only train 2 times a week. If that does happen, we will need to be honest and realistic with our clients' expectations, but we'll also need to adapt the program to make sure we maximize the output and maximize what we can gain from that program within those 2 days. And this is a discussion that is normally best to be had throughout the consultation process, because you have that information to design your program around, which will save you time versus you writing the perfect program and then needing to go back and edit because your client can't or doesn't want to adhere to that. Availability of equipment. Now, I'm smiling for this one because if you're a gym floor personal trainer, you'll understand that 5 p.m. peak times in any gym is chaos. So if the program that you've written has specific equipment in a specific order, we need to be sure that that equipment is going to be available at the time our clients need it. What I would do is I would write a core program, but I would have in the back of my mind all written down some alternate exercises just in case the leg extension we want to get on is taken. So the leg extension works the quads. We've got our client that wants to build their quads. Peak time, 5 p.m, leg extension's taken. What do? Do we have a hat squat? Do we have a cable extension? Do we have a split squat? What alternative can we give our clients that will keep them on track, fulfill their skill level, and make sure their experience of the session and of your personal training isn't affected by the availability of equipment? And last but not least, how much volume do they need to meet the goal? Now, this one will likely take you a little bit of time and data tracking to start to gauge, because if someone comes to you with the goal of building their biceps, we'll say biceps because it's easier to measure, you might start by taking a measurement of their biceps in your assessment process. You'll give them a program that gives them 10 sets of biceps across the course of the week. We'll let time play out and we'll do that for 4 weeks. We'll then reassess with pictures and measurements and look at what's actually happened within that time frame. If the biceps have grown, then that volume you've given them is appropriate for them, so you can keep running it. If their biceps have stayed the same, you'll likely need to increase the amount of volume, so another couple of sets across the course of the week, or another exercise variation that trains the muscle throughout a different length maybe, or a different range throughout the course of the week. And God forbid their biceps haven't shrunk, but if their biceps have shrunk, then we need to reassess and start to understand what is going on. And that might go back to exercise selection, available ranges in their joints, and ultimately anatomy. Section 4, don't worry, as promised, I've got your back. Here is your beginner training program. Now, this is a good starting point for most general population clients based on their goal, based on their skill level, and based on the time available to train. So full body 3 times a week, in most cases, you can't go wrong. Of course, you're probably going to include a little bit of aerobic work. You might have some NEAT in the form of steps, and you might have some prep exercises that will be guided by your assessment process that will prime your client for their session. And in my experience, regardless of how many times you have your client in the gym, whether it's 1, 2, 5 sessions a week, the exercise program can largely remain the same. Because if someone is a beginner client, this phase is going to be essentially a skill acquisition phase, which means if we get them repeating the same or similar exercises across the course of the program and the course of the phase, it's going to accelerate their learning experience, which means they can progress a lot faster later on down the line. So if you're someone that struggles to create and write training programs, you can take this one and put it straight into your coaching business. But please, please, please do remember to do an assessment with your client first and make any adjustments based on your findings. But of course, this is always going to be a great starting point. Right guys, that's a wrap on today's video. If you can go away and implement everything I've discussed here, you'll be well on your way to earning more as a personal trainer. I hope you found this video useful, and if you did, I would really appreciate you hit the subscribe button, and of course, go and drop this video a like too. And as always, if you have any requests for topics for me to cover, just let me know in the comments.